this brief, but I know that most of you are EPOS physicians and support us from a medical oversight perspective. So just a show of hands, how many of you have been involved in the organization, medical oversight, or helping us with logistics in the movement of a bariatric patient? How many found that process to be seamless and not frustrating? Okay, excellent. Well, we're in the same boat then. This is something that we've been struggling with for a number of years on how we move these patients that we need to move, that we can't move from a conventional process. So as Don alluded to or eloquently described in his previous talk, the identification of the bariatric patient is absolutely critical, because it is a massive delay in care if we end up getting to a receiving center or at the bedside of a patient that will not fit in the aircraft that we arrived in. And that does happen. So this is something that's screened between PTN, gets communicated over to the PTCC, and hopefully we can set in a process that we don't arrive at the wrong aircraft and not be able to move the patient. So we currently have in our fleet, we have S-76 helicopters, we have a Bell 412, soon to be EPI. In Kamloops, we have King Air 350s, and we have Citation jets. These all have limitations in terms of width and in terms of weight. So really, when we're looking at an S-76 with standard stretcher configuration, we're looking at a 350-pound patient without really a width restriction. If we use the bariatric stretcher, we have a 500-pound weight restriction. Now, this is the patient and the gear. So if it's just the patient, that's fine, but we have to consider the stretcher, the ventilators, the pumps, the solutions, everything cumulative to make sure that it's below the limits that are required. The Bell in Kamloops, we actually use as a backup bariatric unit because it has a higher capacity. We can put a 700-pound stretcher in there. So that's, again, the stretcher, the patient, the gear, and everything else. It's a lot of work. Just like when we're managing a bariatric patient physiologically, there's a lot of things to consider, and they're very complex and very difficult. The logistics of planning these bariatric patient transports are equally as difficult and vary from our standard procedures. When we look at the King Air, this is one that's important. It's not just a weight restriction, but we now talk about a width restriction. I've been in a situation where I've been at the airport with a patient moving out and couldn't get them through the door of my aircraft, so we had to go back to the hospital. Those are unfortunate situations to be in. So we've set processes in place where hopefully this doesn't occur a lot anymore. So the King Air 350 have to be less than 26 centimeters across. And this is important. This is screened by PTN before it even comes to PTCC. And this is shoulder to shoulder. This isn't an arc over whatever kind of tissue they have anteriorly. This is the actual width of the patient. So this is really critical that we know this. And then we have a limitation of a weight of 350 pounds, equipment, gear, and patient for the King Air 350. The Cessna Citation jet, same weight restriction, only we can get a 30-inch width patient into that aircraft. So all things that need to be considered so we don't send the wrong resource to the patient and create a massive delay. So if it's recognized that we have a patient that's going to fit into this category of our bariatric patient, we have a process of contracting a King Air 1900 D model out of Carson Air. It's based in Kelowna. So this plane isn't our own plane. This is a plane that we have access to through Carson Air. So this is a big improvement from what we had before. Back in the day, we flew all our bariatric patients with the military in the Buffalo. I can remember very clearly the very first one I didn't even know the Buffalo wasn't a pressurized aircraft. We're flying at 24,000 feet to get over some mountains. One of the SAR techs gives me a bag, and I'm like, well, what's this bag for? It's this plastic bag. He goes, that's to put it over your head so you can stick the oxygen tubing up there because we're heading up into the physiologically deficient zone. It was true. I had pictures of us with a plastic bag and an oxygen tube stuck up in there so it didn't become hypoxic during this transport. We've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go, and there's still some challenges. So this aircraft is available to us through Carson Air. It has a 300 kilogram max. So if you're over 300 kilograms, I don't know what we're going to do, quite honestly. We might be back to the military or figuring out a ground option, but so far we haven't had a lot of issues with people larger than that. Last year we moved 39 patients in the bariatric category. So this is not an infrequent ask. This is something that's happening more and more and more, and it's very complex in terms of management. That's a picture of our aircraft there. It's Non-traditional from the sense that we don't have the same life port loading system that we have in our other aircraft, so it requires different procedures. The ramp process is completely different. It's all been adapted. It will take a stretcher power load, and that is really, really key for us in managing these patients with extreme in weights. We can also take 2 patients, although I would not recommend this in this aircraft. It's very difficult. The first patient that goes in the forward position goes on a standard life port system, and so that person has to be manually lifted into the aircraft. It takes about 8 people to do this without hurting somebody. So it's very, very time consuming. It's a challenge, and it's fraught with risk. The other thing that to consider, quite honestly, is the fact that because of the different loading system, the different ramp system, it takes about 20 to 30 minutes to load a patient. To get the ramping out of the aircraft that's secured, set up the ramp, load the patient, it's about a 20 to 30 minute process, and that's if everything goes efficiently without incident. So I know that Dawn talked about we don't actually have this ramp that we magically drag people into the aircraft with, but actually we do, and we move these people from a bariatric perspective. I'll just show you if I can get this to work. How'd you make this work? So this is the actual loading system that we have currently with the 1900. So you can imagine this being a 200 kilogram patient strapped on with a mechanical ventilator, pumps, monitors, everything that's attached. It goes up the first portion of the ramp, and it's being dragged up there with a winch.
Okay, lift it up.
As we get into that position there are hydraulic rams that now start to lift the ramp vertically so we can continue moving the patient into the aircraft.
The ramps go up to 710 pounds.
So you can see it takes a little bit of effort to get these patients loaded. The logistics are challenging. I'll just fast forward that in the interest of time. So we get the patient that's loaded in there. They're on the stretcher, on the Stryker power lift stretcher, which is fantastic for us. But this is not where the challenges end. So the challenges now in this particular aircraft with the bariatric patient are that we don't have access to where our gear is. We strap all our gear on a tray, usually at the foot end of the patient. We don't have a takeoff and landing rated seat. There's actually no seat in the backside of the aircraft. There's a bench, but we can't be on that bench during takeoff and landing or during turbulent weather. So we have no access to adjust the ventilator, to adjust the pumps, to change out blood bags, to do any of those things like that, unless we squeeze around the outboard side of the aircraft, which isn't always possible. So in high-risk patients, we have to reconfigure all of our equipment from the foot end of the patient to place another tray on the forward stretcher. So we put our vent there now, we put our pumps there now, we put our monitors there now. Anything that we may have to change in terms of management for that patient during flight, that happens there. So you can see that it's complex, it's high risk, it's fraught with potential for misadventure because we don't have the access to the patient that we would like to have, but it's far and away better than where we were when we were flying the Buffalo with bags over our head, that I can assure you. But just so you're aware, this is the environment, when you're talking about this is the environment that our bariatric patients are being subjected to. One of the other things that I think is worth mentioning is because we have a contract aircraft and it's not ours, our lead time is about 12 to 24 hours and sometimes longer because we don't own the aircraft. They use the aircraft for other things from a charter perspective. When we need to use that aircraft, it can take minimally sort of 12 hours to pull together the aircraft and the team, but sometimes it might not be available for a couple of days. So that might mean a bariatric patient in Fort St. John doesn't get moved, that needs to be moved. So those are some of our challenges. Quickly going to talk briefly about what's happening with ECMO. Again, one of the more complex and technical patients that we're moving. Brian gave an excellent talk on ECPR the other day, and it's becoming more and more prevalent. We're moving these patients more and more often. They are complex. There's a host of challenges that are associated with this. We're trying to work out, but we haven't really figured out anything, really. We're working with a provincial working group to decide on what the crew configuration should be. Primarily right now, we're moving most of our ECMO patients with 2 critical care paramedics and a perfusionist. We don't know if that's the best model. We don't know if we have the capability to move them on all our aircraft, although we've sorted most of those logistics out now. We do have a provincial working group that's deciding on whether teams should go out, cannulate, come back, or whether, how do we move patients that are already cannulated in the field. These are just a couple of the pictures, and you can appreciate some of the complexities when you're managing these types of patients during transport. And with that, it's probably lunch, but I'm